a nuclear threat to Russia. The Novovoronezh Nuclear Power Plant was attacked by long-range drones. Powerful explosions in Novorossiysk and Saratov, an oil terminal is on fire and a refinery is ablaze. A successful operation by Ukrainian military intelligence. A powerful explosion on the Trans-Siberian Railway blocked one of the Kremlin's main military logistics arteries. The battle for Pokrovsk. Special Operations Forces drones destroyed a gathering place of personnel from the 50th Russian Army. The Kremlin is preparing to deport Ukrainians from the occupied territories to Siberia. The US is launching Operation Southern Spear against narco-terrorists near Venezuela. Russia is getting nervous. China is deploying its own army of robots. And in the global forecast from The Economist for 2026, as they say, the planet is preparing for new crises. Hello, my name is Anastasia Dimitrovskaya. Right now, we're talking about the main news, but first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose each other on YouTube. While Moscow was cynically striking civilian homes and killing peaceful people in Ukraine, on the night of November 14th, Ukraine launched retaliatory strikes on military targets and facilities that power the Russian war machine. In the Strategic Command, Doomsday was cancelled and the Doomsday radio station has temporarily stopped broadcasting its signal due to drone strikes on a substation. This was reported by RIA Novosti. And in Novorossiysk, the dawn was especially bright today. There, port and oil infrastructure were attacked. The main target was the Meshiskaris transshipment complex, which is a key energy infrastructure facility of the Russian state company Transneft.
It was just so bright there right now. It lit up there just like... That's how it lit up over there.
The oil terminal is a strategically important hub for exporting Russian oil and petroleum products through the Black Sea. In addition, social media reports say that during the attack, a vessel in the port was damaged and 3 crew members were injured. Fragments of drones also fell in various parts of the city and damaged several apartment buildings. And as reported by Reuters, the port of Novorossiysk suspended oil exports after the attack of Ukraine. But that's not all, because ammunition depots on the territory of one of the military units and air defense systems were also hit. The depot just blew up. See for yourself. According to the Cyberboroshna community, it is likely that a missile struck the S-300 and S-400 positions at the site of the 1537th Kuban Red Banner anti-aircraft missile regiment. And this is Saratov. That night it also came under attack. A fire broke out at the local oil refinery. The governor of Saratov Oblast confirmed the moment of the attack, but did not specify what exactly was hit. According to him, damage to civilian infrastructure was recorded. After the successful strikes deep inside Russia, Zelensky posted a video on his Telegram showing the launch of Ukrainian long-range Neptunes captioned, "We are doing more." In addition, as a result of the attack on the Novovoronezh Nuclear Power Plant with 8 long-range drones, Russia was exposed to a nuclear threat since the station's distribution device was allegedly damaged, as a result of which 3 units were disconnected from the grid and their output dropped to less than 50%. In my opinion, these kinds of sanctions are much more tangible for the Kremlin. Moreover, I am convinced that Russia understands only the language of force, and that it is only in the language of force that one can speak to those who deliberately strike residential buildings in Ukraine while people are sleeping. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of our viewers are from Kazakhstan, Moldova, and even Europe and the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful to you for your support and proud that we have such reasonable viewers. Let us know in the comments under this episode as well which country you're watching us from and whether people there support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments, and for now, let's continue, because the most interesting part is still ahead. Putin vanished from Moscow, sensed the threat, and rushed off to his ultra-secure Valdai residence, which is guarded better than the entire capital. We'll tell you how the bunker dweller tries to keep up appearances and creates the illusion that he's with his people, rather than relaxing far from the strikes. The AFU, which stands for the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
The secrets of Putin's offices. It turns out that the Russian dictator has been hiding for years where exactly he is and from where he governs the country.
For the past 10 years, we've constantly seen Putin in this very office. The bright, functional office, covering 120 square meters, is located on the second floor of the new representative building in Novovoronezh. Outside the windows, there is 1.5 kilometers of forest. You can't just peek inside from the street. That's where Putin makes important calls, holds video conferences, and meets with people. And according to Kremlin reports, Putin spent almost the entire 2020 to 2021 pandemic working there. Or did he?
After studying dozens of hours of the program Moscow, Kremlin, Putin, archives from the Kremlin website, government procurement documents, building plans, routes of Putin and his entourage, as well as hotel bookings and business trips of state TV employees, journalists from the System Project discovered that since 2015, exact replicas of the suburban office have been created for the dictator, to conceal his actual location at any given moment.
The Kremlin uses these replicas to create the illusion that Putin is working in the Moscow suburbs. In reality, a significant portion of the footage, supposedly from the Moscow region, was filmed in decoy offices far from Moscow.
As of today, at least 3 absolutely identical offices are known to exist in different parts of Russia. In Novovoronezh near Moscow, at the Sochi residence Bocharov Ruchey, and in Valdai. Each of them replicates the original interior down to the smallest details, including the color of the walls, the arrangement of the furniture, and decorative elements, so that viewers cannot tell one room from another. The complex system of duplicate offices allowed the dictator to record addresses and hold meetings from different parts of the country, creating the illusion of stability and a constant presence in the same office. Despite the apparent identicalness of the rooms, journalists have uncovered small but telling differences. The height of the door handles, lines on the walls, and the arrangement of folders on the desk. It was precisely these details that became the key to exposing the carefully concealed deception.
By drawing 2 lines, we can confidently determine which room Putin is using. Here is Novovoronezh, and here is the copy office. And again, here is the original. And here is the copy. Yes.
Since February 2023, Putin has almost completely stopped using the Sochi office after he began to fear strikes from Ukrainian drones. The Bocharov Ruchey residence, once convenient and secure, turned out to be vulnerable, and the dictator began searching for more hidden and protected places to work.
Despite the fact that several air defense positions have been set up there, it's still quite close to Ukraine, and the long range of Ukrainian drone forces makes it possible to cause a lot of trouble there. A whole lot of fun, so to speak. That's why Valdai is farther away, better hidden, and the topography there is better. Well, it's in the forest, it's a residence in the woods, and in Sochi, it's a residence in the mountains in a fairly open area. Well, it's got a view, you know what I mean. So when you build yourself a residence with a view, so you can see both the mountains and the sea, it's not just that you can see the sea, but you can also be seen a little bit from the sea. That's why Sochi dropped out of the list of both favorite residences. Yes.
Since the beginning of 2025, the same fate has befallen the suburban office in Novovoronezh. Now, Putin's addresses and meetings are recorded in 2 different offices, one in the Kremlin and the other at Lake Valdai in the Novgorod region. It was there that another office was set up. Journalists claim that the Valdai residence became the main home for Putin's secret family, unofficially formed with gymnast Alina Kabaeva. There, the dictator could hold private meetings and record addresses, passing them off as footage from the suburban residence. He
also has his own distinctive features. The first is a switch. It is located exactly in the center of the panel, not like in the original at Novovoronezh or in the copy in Sochi. The second is a seam on the wall, the one behind Putin's head. It is much higher than the panel joint. This office has its own writing set, its own unique pattern on the desk, and in total, we found more than 150 photos of this office. Well, that's out of those we were able to identify. Let's once again show how the 3 rooms differ from each other. In all 3 rooms, the seam on the wall behind Putin is at a different height. This is how the positions of the door handles differ. This is how the thermostats are placed in different locations. And this is what the desk and the document folder look like.
Analysis of video materials and travel routes showed that despite the apparent work in Novovoronezh, Putin could actually have been in any of the 3 mentioned offices. Journalists recorded how, on the same day, the president would appear in an office with one type of renovation, a few hours later in another, and then back in the previous one.
Starting around 2018, there has been a process of complete merging between the personal comfort of the president's physical body, his actual body, and the needs of the state. In other words, the body of the king ceases to be a human body and becomes a vast state hyperobject within which clinics, secret residences, and a second family appear. By the way, in parallel with the first, he did end up divorcing his wife. And all of this no longer works in the sense of, let's at least pretend that the president follows the rules, performs the ceremonies, but rather, let's arrange everything so that it's simply convenient for the president.
And while the Kremlin creates the appearance of stability and power, in reality, the Russian dictator is afraid. He fears Ukrainian attacks, he fears losing power, he fears any signs of instability.
And now the situation at the front. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Ukrainian armed forces destroyed a concentration of personnel from Russia's 51st Army in the settlement of Zatishok. Despite unfavorable conditions, Ukrainian drones successfully struck the enemy. In the Kharkiv region, according to deep state analysts, Russian troops have occupied the village of Stepna Novoselivka in the Kupiansk district. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, the defense forces struck the Zaporizhzhia iron ore plant. There is confirmation from the ground and on NASA maps. More than 70% of the power supply has been affected. The mines could be flooded and extraction may come to a complete halt. This is the largest plant occupied by the Russians, where they plan to steal 4.5 million tons of Ukrainian ore. At the same time, the occupiers are advancing in the Zaporizhzhia region. According to Ukrainian military reports, enemy forces are bypassing the settlement of Huliapol from two sides. For more details on what is happening in the Zaporizhzhia direction, let's take a look at our report.
The armed forces of the Russian Federation have shifted their priorities and launched an offensive on another section of the front.
As of today, Russian occupation forces have concentrated their main effort in the Zaporizhzhia region on encircling Huliapol from the east and north sides.
On the Zaporizhzhia front, Russian troops are increasing the pressure.
To achieve this, they recently crossed the Yanchel River, which allowed them to directly reach the settlements of Sladkoye, Ravnopol, and also Yablokovoye.
The occupiers are rapidly advancing towards Zaporizhzhia and bypassing the defensive line through the Dnipropetrovsk region. From the north,
along the same Yanchel River, Russian occupation forces are also trying to increase pressure on the Dnipropetrovsk region, moving toward Pokrovsk through the interfluve of the Volchya and Varanaya rivers, and again along the Yanchel on both the right and the Chechen left banks. In the
direction of Huliapol, the occupiers are trying to cut off Ukrainian logistical routes along two highways.
They will establish a connection to Pokrovsk, and then they will simply have logistical support, pushing as many as 10 army units onto this bridgehead, increasing troop density, and then forming a strike towards Zaporizhzhia.
The Russian command is giving increasing priority to the Huliapol direction. Reinforcements are being transferred here from the Dobropilia direction and from near Pokrovsk. The situation near Huliapol is tense. The American Institute for the Study of War also reports on this. Since the end of August 2025, Putin's army has managed to capture about 250 square kilometers of territory. Deep State shows that the front line is less than 1 kilometer south of Huliapol and 6 kilometers northeast of the city.
It's mostly open fields with some strips of woodland and farmland. They reached the Tselinaya Bal, which is a landscape reserve located south of Ravnopol. Essentially, there are only a few kilometers left to Huliapol, roughly about 5 to 7 kilometers depending on the direction.
The day before, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, reported a significant deterioration of the situation in the Huliapol direction.
The situation has significantly worsened in the Alexandrovka and Huliapol directions, where the enemy, taking advantage of their numerical superiority in manpower and equipment, advanced during fierce fighting and captured 3 settlements. The military groupings of the southern forces are engaged in exhausting battles for Ravnopol and Yablokovo. Appropriate support measures are being taken. The aggressor has suffered significant losses from combined fire. About
the Russian advance. Recently, Russian war correspondents have also been reporting on advances in the Huliapol direction. Units of the Vostok group of forces are advancing on the Ukrainian city.
You have to watch your step very carefully because there are a lot of mines and you need to constantly keep an eye on the sky. Because drones are frequently flying around in the area. These are their devices, both FPV drones and smaller ones.
This is the Russians' new operational concept. a gradual depletion of Ukrainian defenses using infiltration tactics. According to Ukrainian military sources, the enemy is suffering significant losses during attempts to advance. Huliaipol is a very important settlement in the defense of Zaporizhia. War correspondents also note this.
After Guliaipol, there will be Orekov, and then, apart from Kamishuvaka and Stepnogorsk, there will be nothing to stop the enemy from getting to the southern outskirts of Zaporizhia. This will also affect the PGT. Pokrovskaya. If the enemy captures him, he will be able to reach Volnyansk.
The Russian army is systematically carrying out airstrikes on Pokrovsk in the Dnipropetrovsk region. In the footage, you can see the consequences of Russia's terrorist acts. Vehicles have been destroyed, buildings have been ruined. This is the center of the settlement. The Russians plan to strike at the rear to complicate supply lines, destroy logistics and drone operators, as well as to carry out targeted incursions behind the lines. After that, small assault groups conduct operations, trying to advance quickly and force Ukrainian units to abandon their positions.
But this is such a negative turn of events, which could become a precursor to the formation of a strategic foothold and conditions for the Russian occupation forces, which in the future could even potentially allow them to organize an offensive towards Zaporizhia.
Volodymyr Zelensky visited the front in Zaporizhia region on a working trip. He listened to reports from the commanders. Wishing you health, guys.
Glory to Ukraine.
Health and glory.
It is my honor to be here today and to award the new 65th Brigade. Thank you for what you do for defending Ukraine. Despite the enemy's efforts, the fighting continues. The best assault units are fighting for every centimeter of our land. I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They hold the front and stand against a vast horde that greatly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine, and if you can't do so financially, write them words of encouragement in the comments.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Russian Z-bloggers have been given a week to clean up their channels and apologize for what they, quote, have written there. In fact, the leader of the Kadyrovites has announced large-scale repressions against Z-patriots. Abdi Alaudinov stated that the first charges against propagandists are just a warm-up. In the coming days, the police will receive numerous denunciations against Z-bloggers who dared to argue among themselves or criticize the command.
As a result, it turned out that the people who did this ended up under attack themselves. Now they have started to gradually receive charges for discrediting, and then the materials have already been sent on for extremism itself. Well, soon this machine will pick up such momentum that, of course, they'll all be stunned.
The bloggers were given a week to come to their senses, so to speak, and several propagandists have already gone to Kaludinov to beg for forgiveness. Among those who have repented are Ilya Remeslo and the author of the Katya Valya channel.
We haven't released most of the materials yet because we wanted to give everyone a chance to wake up, those who, as they say, still have some brains left, to delete all the filth from their channels and sincerely apologize for what they've already posted. As for those who do not do this, as we have already stated, we will of course destroy them in the legal field through criminal charges, so that each of them gets exactly what they truly deserve.
But not everyone came to bow down during these so-called purges.
Last week, the author of The Security Guard in a Padded Jacket, Oksana Kobelev, was detained for criticizing that same Alaudinov. Propagandists Roman Alekin and Sergei Markov have already been declared foreign agents. Tatiana Montyan has been added to the list of extremists and terrorists.
Moscow plans to import 12,000 Shahed drone assemblers from North Korea. Ukraine's Main Intelligence Directorate has reported that by the end of 2025, Russia plans to bring in about 12,000 North Korean workers to work at enterprises in the special economic zone of Alabuga in Tatarstan. As is known, it is in Alabuga that long-range drones such as Shahed and Geran are manufactured, which the Russian army uses to carry out terrorist strikes on Ukraine's civilian infrastructure.
To discuss the details of the sale of labor at the end of October, a meeting was held at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation between local officials and representatives of the North Korean company Jiyang Technology Trade Company, which is responsible for recruiting and selecting Korean workers. The Muscovites promised to pay the imported labor force about $2.50 per hour, and each shift for the workers will last at least 12 hours. And
while the Kremlin and the DPRK, so to speak, shook hands by signing yet another cooperation agreement, the Main Intelligence Directorate struck at the Trans-Siberian Railway and blocked the Kremlin's key logistical artery. The Main Intelligence Directorate of Ukraine reported that on November 13th, near the settlement of Sosnovka in Khabarovsk Krai, Russia, an explosion occurred, blocking the movement of cargo along the Trans-Siberian Railway, which is used to transport weapons and ammunition, including those received from the territory of the DPRK.
As a result of a special operation by the Main Intelligence Directorate, a freight train was derailed. The railway track was damaged. The Kremlin's special services once again demonstrate their inability to ensure effective control even over the most critical infrastructure facilities for the occupiers.
Well, as they say, you can't add or take away from that. No one complains about Russia, the authorities just shrug their shoulders. Although in Russia's case, the authorities say that everything is going according to plan. In the US, the longest shutdown in history has ended. Trump signed the relevant laws, so can we now hope that weapons from the States will be supplied to Ukraine in full? And in general, what does the end of the shutdown mean in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war? But more on that in the next segment.
You can't run a country like this, Trump said, and ended the shutdown. Apparently, the US president likes to break his own records. The budget pause lasted 43 days, which is 8 days longer than the previous pause under Trump.
And now it is an honor for us to sign this incredible bill and get our country working again. Thank you.
The shutdown had consequences not only for Americans, but also for countries dependent on Washington, including Ukraine.
This is overall a very serious sign, a symptom of a deep crisis in the political system of the United States itself. In today's world, where quick responses and effective work are necessary, this is an unaffordable luxury. So, yes, on the one hand, the processes have been unblocked, but this is only postponing the deadline.
While the US government was at a standstill, $5 billion worth of arms exports also came to a halt. This aid was intended for NATO allies, including Ukraine.
The processes for supplying weapons to Ukraine were under the jurisdiction of the Pentagon. And the Pentagon, as I mentioned earlier, was not shut down even during the government shutdown. Yes, there was a certain imbalance, a breakdown in communication, because some government employees were directly affected by the government shutdown, for example, those working in the Oval Office and certain related ministries. Here, it is true that the logistics and processes of making important bureaucratic decisions were at least partially disrupted.
Now that the shutdown is over, the blocked arms supply contracts are coming back into effect. But the question is how quickly all of this will actually start working.
At the same time, the process has been unblocked, and now the bureaucratic and instrumental components will, of course, be implemented much more dynamically than before. Does this mean that Ukraine will receive the necessary weapons more quickly? It's hard to say. Here, we really need to rely more on the official position of our delegations in the United States.
The unfreezing of American contracts has also become an important signal for NATO allies.
Of course, all NATO countries look to the key NATO country, the United States of America, because all the processes are tied specifically to this country. Both the military-industrial complex, the coordination of military contingents and military training, in short, absolutely everything. All of it is focused on the United States. And when the United States for about 2 months or so ends up in a kind of limbo or half position, of course, yes, this has a certain negative effect on NATO as a whole.
But in the Kremlin, they surely understand that the end of the shutdown is not in their interest at all.
When the United States is destabilized from within by processes like a shutdown, well, of course, the Russian Federation will only add fuel to the fire. That's obvious. And they will spread disinformation and do whatever it takes to drag out this process until the states stabilize, remember about the Russians, and are able to act in a more unified way. For example, to strengthen the sanctions package or, say, to start working on the next one.
But what's interesting is that the temporary funding for the US has been extended until January 30th, even though the issue that caused this shutdown in Congress still hasn't been resolved.
On the one hand, the processes have been unblocked, but this is only a postponement of the deadline regarding the issue of healthcare reform, which the Democrats are talking about its extension. Well, Obama's, yes, they have to return to it in December, at the end of December. So yes, the processes have been unblocked, but they can also now lead to other budgetary consequences.
According to Economist's estimates, the daily losses from the shutdown for the American economy amounted to about $15 billion.
The Kremlin is seeking negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow and is doing so by appealing to Washington. We will explain which paths for peace talks between Zelensky and Putin are currently open and what role Donald Trump could play in the peace process.
Peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine have been suspended. According to Ukraine's Deputy Foreign Minister Serhiy Kyslytsya, Putin refuses to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky, and there are no meetings with the Russian delegation in Istanbul. Any tangible result?
In a dictatorship, it is impossible to have productive discussions with negotiating teams representing the dictator. They have a very strict mandate, and they must defend the position they have been instructed to uphold. According to
the results of the negotiations in Istanbul in the spring and summer of 2025, Russia did not change its previous demands, including those regarding the denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine.
They are well aware of our position. As I have already mentioned previously, they currently have our position in writing. There is absolutely nothing secret about it whatsoever. It was stated by President Putin in June of 2024 when he spoke at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
At the same time, Lavrov stated that the Kremlin still hopes for a meeting between Putin and Trump in Budapest. However, the White House no longer believes in empty promises from the Kremlin.
Moscow's intentions can only be judged by its actions, and it has made it clear what it wants. It wants the rest of Donetsk region, and obviously Ukraine will not agree to that. Right now, we see that Russia continues to carry out long-range strikes on Ukrainian territory, apparently to destroy its energy system and, so to speak, demoralize the country.
Right now, Russian diplomacy is trying to shift the blame for the breakdown of negotiations onto Ukraine. Moscow has no intention of ending the war, but at the same time, the Kremlin does not want to be left without a dialogue with Washington.
The Russians are now trying to somehow break this diplomatic ice, to shatter it in various ways. And let's say, both formally through diplomacy and informally. They are currently working through the G7. Through communication channels, they most likely tried to resume once again the Istanbul negotiation process. But in any case, the Russians are not ready to accept Trump's ultimatum. And Trump's ultimatum is very simple. Any political negotiations will begin only when the fighting stops.
According to U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Washington has practically exhausted its potential to strengthen sanctions against Russia. And now it will focus on enforcing the existing restrictions. And once again, the White House is urging its European colleagues to put more pressure on Russia, in particular regarding Putin's shadow fleet.
It is also important for Europe to participate in this negotiation process because, after all, this is a war taking place on European territory. And Europe, one way or another, plays an important role in ensuring, let's put it this way, the general framework of European security. In
the matter of ending the war in Ukraine, the White House administration will no longer fall for Putin's tricks, such as the empty talks in Istanbul with the pseudo-historian Medinsky or the fruitless Alaska meeting.
Trump will not agree to another meeting like the one that took place in Anchorage, Alaska previously. A political slap in the face, yes, a slap from Putin. Well, because it seems to me he's already tired of getting slapped by Putin. In
the context of significant sanctions pressure, Putin will likely have to abandon his maximalist demands and agree to direct negotiations with Volodymyr Zelensky.
China has deployed what it calls an army of robots. It is known that the company Uptech Robotics has announced the world's first mass delivery of industrial humanoid robots. Hundreds of Valkyr S2 robots have already been shipped from the factory. Meanwhile, Uptech's so-called order book is enormous, and the first batches are immediately going to the largest players in the industry. As is known, the robots will be implemented in manufacturing and logistics, where round-the-clock, uninterrupted work is crucial. Does this army of robots make you uneasy, or is it just me? Write what you think about this kind of progress. The British magazine The Economist has published its annual cover forecast for the world for the coming year. On it, Zelensky is depicted in military uniform with binoculars, along with tanks, missiles, drones, and submarines. And there's a hint at the continuation of war and global tension. Separately shown are trade conflicts, a new wave of weight loss drugs, robots, and neurotechnologies, as well as the 2026 World Cup and the Winter Olympics. The United States has launched a large-scale military operation near Venezuela under the pretext of fighting drug trafficking. In fact, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth announced the start of a major military operation, which, according to official statements from the American administration, is aimed at combating drug trafficking.
President Trump ordered action to be taken, and the Department of Defense is carrying out those orders. Today, I am announcing Operation Southern Spear, led by the Joint Task Force Southern Spear and Southcom. This mission protects our homeland, eliminates narco-terrorists from our hemisphere, and shields our homeland from drugs that are killing our people. The Western Hemisphere is the region of the Americas, and we will defend it.
This decision was preceded by a meeting at the White House on November 11th, during which Trump was presented with military options for action in the region, including the consideration of possible ground strikes against Venezuela.
The scale of the operation is evidenced by the significant buildup of the U.S. military presence in the area of responsibility of Southern Command. Military ships, F-35 fighter jets, and reconnaissance aircraft were deployed to the region. The culmination was the deployment of a carrier strike group led by the world's largest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald Ford. On board the ship are up to 5,000 military personnel, an air wing that includes F-18 Super Hornet fighters, as well as long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles.
In addition, several American media outlets, including the New York Times, previously reported that the Trump administration was considering options to legalize declaring war on Venezuela.
Trump is weighing options and risks of attacking Venezuela. President Trump has not yet made a decision, but his advisors are pursuing several objectives, from attacking drug cartels to seizing oil fields, in an attempt to justify the removal of Nicolas Maduro from power. At the
same time, the official representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova, stated that Russia is extremely concerned about the U.S. military methods for combating drug trafficking in Venezuela.
We are extremely concerned about the military methods chosen by the United States to solve the problem, which are more like blatant interference in the internal affairs of Latin American countries than anything else, and these actions by the American authorities are quite direct. They contradict the United States' international legal obligations under the 1988 United Nations Convention against illicit traffic in narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances.
Furthermore, Zakharova states that there is no evidence of drug transportation on the civilian vessels that were targeted by the United States.
Not to mention that the American authorities have not provided any evidence regarding the flag state being involved in drug transportation. Unfounded military attacks on civilian vessels are a dangerous precedent that paves the way for indiscriminate assaults on any country under the false pretext of combating drug trafficking.
I myself can neither confirm nor deny Zakharova's words, since the United States does not properly cover its actions regarding Venezuela, and even American media report that the fight against drug trafficking is not the primary reason for the U.S. operation against Venezuela. But, in my opinion, once again, Russia is definitely not the country that has any moral right to judge what is happening. As the saying goes, we see a speck in someone else's eye, but don't notice the log in our own. The Kremlin is preparing to deport Ukrainians from the temporarily occupied territories to Siberia. This was reported by the Center for National Resistance. The article states that Russia is launching a program for the development of Siberia worth 700 billion rubles. But behind the loud slogans lies the preparation for the mass resettlement of residents from the occupied Ukrainian territories. The Secretary of the Security Council, Sergei Shoigu, is selling this as a kind of industrial project. But in reality, it is about a new wave of imperial deportation. According to the Center for National Resistance, the first stage has already begun in the temporarily occupied territories. Closed letters are being sent to schools, hospitals, and utility companies, demanding that they identify employees for long-term assignments in the Far East.
Managers are being forced to provide lists of employees who are not burdened by family circumstances. This wording essentially singles out the most vulnerable and those who are easiest to deport without causing significant public outcry. It's a vague formulation, the first step toward resettlement under state programs disguised as a voluntary initiative. This mechanism almost completely recreates the Soviet practice of organized recruitment, through which, in the 1940s and 1950s, Crimean Tatars, Ukrainians from Western Ukraine, Chechens, and other peoples were forcibly deported. The rhetoric has changed. Shoigu talks about developing Siberia, and ideologues romanticize shifting the center of development to the east. However, The essence of imperial policy remains unchanged. First comes passportization, then work assignments, then state resettlement programs, and finally, a complete change in the demographic makeup of the occupied regions.
Well, really, it's all quite clear. Russians don't want to go to Siberia, so the Kremlin is preparing to build a new empire with the hands of Ukrainians torn from their homes. Personally, I'm not surprised, unfortunately. It's all in Russia's style. And what do you think about this? Write in the comments. How do you like our news? Let us know what we should change to become better. We will definitely take it into account. In the meantime, give this video a like to support what we're already doing. And be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss our next episodes. See you.